Imagine yourself coming into a Mormon community for the first time and hearing talk about gold plates, an angel named Moroni, and baptisms for the dead. Imagine seeing for the first time 9 children and 2 beleaguered parents in a beat-up station wagon with a bumper sticker reading, "Families are forever." Poor non-member does not know whether this is a boast or a complaint. And where do these families go to church? At a steakhouse.
Anyone who has spent any time amongst members of the Mormon Church will know that there is a complex and strange idiolect. From Liahoners to mutual, it can take a long time to become fluent in Mormon speak. But what about common everyday words? Words understood to any speaker of the English language, not just Mormons. Words like truth, integrity, translation. We're going to take a look at these words that, in theory, have a plain and simple meaning, but which in practice are having their definitions changed by the leaders of the LDS Church. So let's explore the Mormon equivalent of Orwell's Newspeak, starting with
integrity.
David A. Bednar recently said,
"In a world that increasingly may mock our beliefs, that's how we will be known, by our kindness, our service, our integrity." I'm going to say that again. Our integrity. That can be a scarce resource in many places around the world. Our integrity.
Now, as it is broadly understood, integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. The problem is, by that broad understanding of the word, the Mormon Church is actually showing a profound lack of integrity at the moment. For example, with the SEC investigation that uncovered the systematic hiding of the Church's wealth over nearly 20 years. So in light of this kind of institutional behaviour, how can Bednar say that the Church will be known for its integrity? Well, this is where we see a subtle shifting of the goalposts, which is typical of the way words become redefined. In a 2002 BYU address, David A. Bednar spoke on integrity this way.
Closely associated with becoming men and women of integrity and honesty is reaching a point where we are no longer driven or directed by rules. Instead, we learn to govern our lives by principles. To be sure, we keep the rules, but we also begin to ask ourselves, what is the principle involved here? Such a person becomes less dependent upon external scaffolding and structure, and more dependent upon quiet and ongoing divine direction.
Okay, so integrity is about following the rules, but now there's a carve-out for divine direction. Therefore, while remaining consistent with his definition of integrity, the Church can lie to the government about their money because they were divinely directed to do so. The same applies in Fairview, Texas. Because they were divinely directed to put a massive temple in this residential area, it is not an act devoid of integrity to lie to the town about the importance of steeple height to the religious worship of Latter-day Saints by sending letters telling members to make such a claim as though it's always been the case. This new definition that Bednar has created also creates a hierarchy of principles, where following divine direction is a higher principle than the principle of being honest. And because divine direction comes through the mouth of prophets...
Do you know what the word prophet means? He speaks for God.
This makes the Church and its leaders the vehicle for God's will. You can see why then people like Jack N. Gerard begin to conflate integrity with loyalty to the Church.
The oppositional pole of this world is an essential part of God's plan of salvation. How we respond to the pole is the essence of who we are, a measure of our integrity. The worldly pole can be as direct as to destroy fidelity in marriage, or as subtle as posting anonymous comments critical of church doctrine or culture. Exercising integrity in our choices is an outward expression of an inner commitment to follow the Savior, Jesus Christ.
Now, you could argue that he's saying it's the anonymity that makes us devoid of integrity. But then are you really going to argue that Elder Gerard would greenlight posting comments online that are critical of the Church, just so long as one uses their own name? I don't think he would. But let me know what you think in the comments. Finally, Ronald A. Rasband recently said,
"Integrity is being honest and forthright, fair and obedient, willing at all cost to choose God's ways."
At all costs? Even the cost of those things that normally form the backbone of integrity? Because despite the initial assertion that integrity is being honest and forthright, the caveat of being willing at all costs to choose God's ways means if you're confronted with the choice between honesty and God's ways, say, not revealing parts of the endowment ceremony when asked about them, then again, the hierarchy of principles seems to be at play here, when choosing God's ways is apparently more important than honesty, and in other instances, it's sometimes more important than even kindness.
Just as integrity flows from the first great commandment to love God, being true to each other flows from the second, to love our neighbors as ourselves. A life of integrity is not a life of perfection. It is a life in which we strive every day to foremost be true to God, and within that context to be true to others. President Oakes reminds us, our zeal to keep the second commandment must not cause us to forget the first.
Now, if you need evidence of that second point, check the comments section of this or any of my videos. And then when Rasband says,
Integrity creates trust, honors truth, and values spirituality.
that leads us nicely into our next word.
Truth is truth. Some things are simply true.
As it would normally be understood, the truth is the property of being in accord with fact or reality. If you say something is true, there will be facts or realities that will support that claim. If I say I'm telling the truth, that means what I'm saying is in accord with fact or reality. If I said my brother hit me, it would be true if, were a camera to have been rolling, it would have captured the incident. This is what philosophers would call the correspondence theory of truth, in that the thing which is true corresponds with fact or reality. Now, any philosophers out there that don't subscribe to the correspondence theory or something similar to it, you can treat this next part as just one big hypothetical. Here is an example of Russell M. Nelson using the word truth in what appears to be a correspondent way.
We may not always tell people what they want to hear. Prophets are rarely popular. But we will always teach the truth.
If we were to then test that claim, it would appear to be false. Prophets, for example, have at least on just one occasion taught something that was neither true at the time, nor was it later proven to be true.
He then asked, "Why is your church so wealthy that you can afford to build buildings in our country throughout the world? How do you get your money?" I answered that the church is not wealthy, but that we follow the ancient biblical principle of tithing, which principle is re-emphasized in our modern scripture. I explained also that our church has no paid ministry and indicated that these were two reasons why we're able to build the buildings then underway.
Both of these claims are false. They do not correspond to the facts as they are known now and as they were known at the time. It is a matter of fact that the church pays the top 100 or so of its leaders. Even if you call it a stipend, it's still payment. And they did so when President Monson taught otherwise. It is also a matter of fact that the church is wealthy. So wealthy that, as we've already discussed, they took deliberate steps to hide the size and nature of their wealth from public view. This was also the case when President Monson taught to the contrary. So it is also not true in and of itself to say,
We will always teach the truth.
when there is at least one example of them teaching something that isn't. If we apply the correspondence definition of truth here, prophets do not always teach the truth, because they do not always teach that which is in accord with facts or reality, as demonstrated. But what if that's not the definition that President Nelson is using? What if he's redefined the word truth? In the broader context of Nelson's address, I don't think he really means truth in the correspondent sense. For example, when Nelson says,
The arbiter of truth is God, not your favorite social media news feed, not Google, and certainly not those who are disaffected from the church.
this redefines truth to mean not what corresponds with fact or reality, but instead what God arbitrates as such. This is a different definition entirely. He has redefined truth so that it is outside the scope of the usual methods with which one would determine truth from a correspondent viewpoint. Simply put, if truth is not what corresponds with fact or reality, but instead it is what God arbitrates as such, then the only way to identify truth is to know if God has said it is true. That puts all the power in the hands of those who claim to speak for God. This means that the truth is actually whatever Russell M. Nelson says is true, because
He speaks for God.
And that's not even getting into whether something is true because God calls it true, or whether something is true because God correctly identifies it as true. But that's a discussion for another time. The fact of the matter is, Russell M. Nelson is using a very different definition of truth here, which comes with a very different methodology. That being, truth is whatever he says it is because God told him. And isn't that convenient? Before we get to the next redefined word, let's extract ourselves from the philosophical weeds and move to something more basic, the word donation. This channel runs on them, and so if you can afford to support this work, $10, $15, $20 a month at the donor box link below will help me continue to do this work full time. I've got some really exciting videos coming up, including one where I get up close and personal with a horse. Horse, that's another word that's been redefined. Anyway, regardless of if you can support me financially or not, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss my excellent adventures with Indra the tapir.
Joseph Smith did not write the Book of Mormon, he translated it.
The position of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is still, to this day, that the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God.
The prophet Joseph was 24 years old and had already received numerous revelations and completed the translation of the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God.
It was also the position held by the translator himself, Joseph Smith Jr. The ancient record thus brought forth from the earth as the voice of a people speaking from the dust, and translated into modern speech by the gift and power of God as attested by divine affirmation, was first published to the world in the year 1830 as the Book of Mormon. And so it goes that the Book of Mormon started as being inscribed on gold plates in one language, called Reformed Egyptian by Joseph Smith, and was subsequently translated by the gift and power of God into another language, English. This is the narrative most of us understood, and accompanied by pictures such as these, lends itself to the understanding that the gift and power of God enabled Joseph to engage with the original language, a language he did not know, and then dictate the English translation of that language. The problem arises when a new narrative tries to frame the translation of the Book of Mormon as a revelatory process, not involving the physical plates at all, but instead with Joseph Smith placing a peepstone he found while digging a well into a hat and reading aloud the words of the Book of Mormon as they appear to him in English on the stone. That is not a translation, that is the dictation of received information. But it is also now the commonly accepted method by which Joseph Smith produced the Book of Mormon.
See the light when he'd take that position.
And yet leaders of the church still, in 2024, are calling what he did translation, when that's not what it is. They have to do this because Joseph Smith himself used the word translation. I would imagine he did this for the exact same reason the church didn't tell us about the rock in a hat method for so long, because translation sounds more legitimate, it's more palatable, and yet that is not what happened. Now our final word is significant. The church claimed that in the town of Fairview, Texas, where the tallest religious building is the 68-foot LDS meeting house, that it was a significant concession for them to lower their proposed 173-foot and 8-inch spire by 15 feet, or 8%. Now that's not even a tithe, but to learn more about what's going on with this issue in Texas, click just here.